we have two co-presenters, and they're both partners with Denali Group. And the first one is John Evans, and John Evans is one of the original founding partners of Denali Group, and he's been there since 1996. He also leads up the Denali Intelligence Service Line. In 2006, John led the startup of the Intelligence Division, and that's designed specifically for sourcing professionals. He's consulted in the supply chain and strategic procurement space since 1989, bringing with him experience from A.T. Kearney, and then co-founded Denali Consulting in 96. He's consulted with more than 100 Fortune 500 companies, leading more than 50 strategic sourcing programs across direct and indirect categories. So obviously an expert in today's space. Co-presenting with him today is Don Doherty, who's also a managing partner with Denali Group. His focus areas within the group are Denali Consulting and Denali Recruiting and Staffing Service Lines. Don has more than 17 years of supply chain management consulting experience and 8 years of industry experience, including senior positions with Co-Development International, Sabre Decision Technologies, and McDonnell Douglas. Don has extensive experience managing, facilitating, and participating in consulting engagements related to strategic sourcing, supply chain management, and logistics optimization. He's consulted also with a couple hundred of the Fortune 1000 companies in North America and Europe in a variety of industries, including energy, aerospace, manufacturing, and financial institutions. So what I'd like to do is welcome both John and Don and hand it over to you guys, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dawn. Hi, everyone. This is Don Doherty. I'm happy that you could join both John and I today in discussing a really exciting and thought-provoking topic, procurement trends for 2010 and beyond. So we're going to be getting into what do we see happening now, and can we look into that crystal ball and really get a glimpse of what it might look like in the next 3 to 5 years. We're well down the path of gathering insights from cross-industry procurement leaders. So today we want to share some of those emerging trends as well as some preliminary insights into what procurement might look like tomorrow. But before we do that, I want to take a quick minute just to introduce the Denali Group for those of you who are not familiar with who we are. Don, I'm having trouble changing the slide here.
Okay, we'll have Amanda take over.
There we go.
For you.
Okay, very good. Denali Group is a mid-sized procurement services and advisory firm that works across numerous industries. We're based here in the U.S., but we do have a larger footprint with delivery capabilities across the globe. We were founded back in 1996, and we do a number of things through the 4 divisions of Denali Group, and they're all related to procurement and supply chain. First, we have Denali Consulting, which provides consulting services primarily in the area of strategic sourcing, procurement transformation, and general supply chain improvement. We also have Denali Sourcing Services that provides on-demand sourcing execution services to global companies. Denali Intelligence is the next one that provides subscription-based market intelligence to sourcing professionals. And finally, Denali Recruiting and Staffing, which really helps procurement and logistics organizations across the country with their recruiting efforts, both temp and permanent positions. Thanks, Amanda. So for the next hour, we want to basically take you through what we've found so far. Basically the process that we've embarked on to gather trends and innovation. And we'll get into a lot of the detail around what those emerging trends we've heard other companies say are on their radar screen over the next couple of years. We'll talk about our approach to discovering innovation. And finally, we'll get into a lot of those innovative thoughts and what the procurement function might look like over the next 3 to 5 years. So we started this journey just a couple of months ago, back in April, and we're currently in phase 4 of a 5-phase process. We started by developing a series of questions and discussion topics, and then we went out and identified and interviewed over 30 different procurement directors, VPs, and CPOs across a variety of industries. And really the focus of that effort was to find out about today's procurement challenges and hear a bit about what they're working on in the near term over the next 1 to 2 years. And then we built on that initial insight. Just last week we held a CPO roundtable. We had a great turnout of senior procurement leaders from Fortune 500 companies, with many being Fortune 100 or Fortune 200, and we had a lot of fun. It was collectively very eye-opening on where they thought procurement innovation was heading. So we're currently in the process of summarizing those findings, some of which you'll hear about today, and the detail from that CPO roundtable we're sharing with the participants. But general findings will be published over the next 1 to 2 months in a series of white papers and available to the public. Next slide. So we're on slide 10 for those of you who are not following online. The research really focused on getting a better understanding of what trends were emerging in procurement and what innovations might be seen in the foreseeable future. So these are just some of the questions that we asked CPOs that we talked to. What are they focusing on today, and where do they expect to be focusing tomorrow? What are some of the factors and challenges that they might see impacting their agenda? And everybody certainly has a wish list, and so we asked them what their wish list was. What sort of technology enablement were they hoping would be available to them as they move forward? And what breakthrough innovations do we really see helping to elevate the function of procurement in general? Many of the organizations aren't there yet, but really how do we become a real value contributor and get a seat at that executive table that we always talk about? So, with that context setting, we wanted to start out, and before we get into some of those initial findings, we wanted to get your thoughts on procurement challenges that you see. So we're gonna do this polling question first. So why don't you go to that polling question, Amanda, please? Thank you. So what area do you think will pose the greatest challenge for procurement leaders in the next several years? Is it A, spend visibility, forecasting, and really getting a proactive cross-business unit involvement? Is it expanding the whole footprint and procurement scope? Is it really addressing organizational development and all of the needs of the organization and managing and investing in that organization, or is it something other? So take a couple of minutes and please vote.
So folks, on the lower right-hand side of your screen, the poll should be open for you, and go ahead and click and hit submit. We'll keep the poll open for just a minute, and then we'll close it and share the results with you. So Don, while the poll is open, maybe I can talk to you about a question that I think is top of mind for most executives today. But we've got an aging workforce in a lot of procurement organizations. How do you think that's going to play into what people might choose as their top challenge?
Well, it's on the forefront of everybody's thoughts today for sure, with baby boomers retiring and Gen Y workforce being a very different type of workforce. We see knowledge management becoming essential, and really engaging those boomer replacements kind of playing into a real key part of whether organizations will be successful going forward.
It just seems like we're going to have to just make sure that we start getting more people out of these programs and into the corporate jobs at a very young age and grooming them. And yet, with the Generation Y folks, they really don't want to go into a job and stay in the same job. So I almost see them rotating through as part of their experience. Yep,
that's exactly right. It's I'm sure we have some Generation Y folks on the call today, but it's a very different environment than what companies, especially older established companies that have a lot of boomers that have are nearing retirement or at that retirement age. We work with some industries today where up to 30 to 40% of their procurement department is at or within retirement age in the next 2 to 3 years. So it's dramatic, and we need to be cognizant of all that and ready.
Very good. So we're going to go ahead and close the poll. It takes just a minute to populate the results. So if you're a betting man, where do you think the largest percent is going to be? Oh, never mind. It came up already.
Well, we see that 62% thought that A, really getting better spend visibility and involvement across all the business units and playing into a larger part of that supply chain and working up into forecasting was key. And the other two, 18%, 18%, and 3% were the remainder. We, interestingly enough, these top three, A, B, and C, were the top three areas that were identified and kind of rose to the top when we interviewed procurement executives over the last month or so. So we're going to get into a little bit of the detail now about each of those trends, and John's going to go into that. So I am going to turn it over to John right now, and I'll talk to you a little bit later.
Okay, thanks, Don. As Don mentioned, our research really had two parts. The first part was really looking at trying to understand the trends that are facing procurement executives today, and that's what I'm going to talk about first. We interviewed about 35 different CPOs and procurement executives to find out, as Don mentioned, where are the key issues they're facing today, and what do they expect to be focusing on in the short term in the next 1 to 2 years. And that's what I'll present next. And then we use that information to organize our innovation summit that we held last week, and then we'll share that with you as well at the end. And it was interesting. We probably got about 300 different data points in all these interviews of focus areas, areas of concern, areas of interest. But when you sorted through those, they all seemed to gel, and really, for the most part, they all gelled in these three main areas that I'll talk about now. There were three key themes that came up with regard to trends. One was the first one was really with regard to proactive involvement of procurement, getting procurement to be more proactive in projects and initiatives, specifically with regard to spend visibility and forecasting. So that was one main theme, and I'll talk about in detail, a little more detail what that means next. The second major theme that we heard from these trends, short-term trends, was regard to expanding the scope of procurement, not just in the scope of what the spend that procurement addresses, but in the activities that it addresses. So most procurement executives are seeing that their scope is broadening, their workload is increasing, they're getting involved in more activities as well as more and more spend, and they expect that to continue in the future. The third major theme was with regard to the organization. As Don mentioned, you've got the baby boomers retiring. There's a lot of transition in the whole procurement organization. So most really expect a strong focus on helping in some new creative organizational models, building the organization, talent management, and knowledge management. And we'll talk about what that means next. Excuse me. So the first major theme with regard to proactive involvement of procurement, what does that really mean? First key kind of theme was with regard to spend visibility. Most say that today the information exists to have better spend visibility, but most don't really have as formal of a process, and they haven't rolled out the technology to the extent they would like to get to the point of just pushing a button and getting real-time spend visibility. So that's something that they expect to be focusing on over the next year to 2 years. The second part of that is where we see it evolving, is not only looking back at spend, but also looking forward, have forward-looking spend visibility. So most expect to use a combination of market intelligence to understand pricing trends, as well as by getting more involved with their key stakeholders in the spend and the budget forecasting process to be able to put together not only spend visibility but spend forecast, and that'll be very instrumental in terms of working with their stakeholders to give them visibility of where their spend is going, in the next 1 to 3 years. So that's another key trend. Another key trend is getting more involved up front in planning and forecasting, particularly with regard to contingent workforce planning. This is a growing area as more and more companies outsource and more companies use contingent labor. Most procurement executives that we talked to indicated that this was a big area that they were getting more and more involved in, and expected this to be a big trend. Another area was with regard to savings tracking. Most want to have more formalized savings tracking, and specifically having tighter integration with finance. And then the last area with regard to proactive involvement was regard to building relationships with key stakeholders. Most are beginning to spend more time with key stakeholders and expect that to continue in the future, especially as they try to get involved in more key processes and more areas of spend. The second major theme that we talked about was with regard to expanding the scope of procurement. So what does this really mean? One area is just the elevation of procurement on the executive floor. This is a trend that's probably been happening over the last 10 years, but it's still really not the standard practice. We're hearing more and more that companies or procurement organizations are run by one single CPO, so it's more and more being centralized. It's more and more being elevated, but it's still not the standard yet. I think maybe 60% of the companies we talk to have a single CPO with executive involvement, and most expect that to continue to increase. The second main area is with regard to outsourcing. There was a recent survey that TPI did with Sourcing Interest Group, where about 31% or 16% of companies, procurement organizations today, outsource parts of procurement. They expect that to double to 31% by 2012. So, and that was pretty much reiterated by the interviews that we did. Most expect to do more procurement outsourcing. Most expect their companies to be doing more outsourcing. And more, I think historically, procurement didn't typically get involved in outsourcing, or if they did, it was at a very low level. Today, more and more procurement is playing a leading role in outsourcing decisions and selecting outsourcing partners, and most CPOs expect that to continue and increase. So that's a big area of growth with regard to the scope of procurement. Another area is in the area of category management, expanding into broader global portfolio management. As most of you know, this is an area that's really evolved over the last 10 years. It started out as from transactional buying to commodity management, and over the years, commodities broadened based on the supply market expanding, and companies moved from commodity management into category management. What we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is category management expanding into portfolio management. So categories are getting broader and broader. The supply markets are expanding. So maybe years ago, someone may have been in charge of janitorial services. That broadened into categories such as facility services. What we're seeing is now companies are grouping like categories into portfolios that have similar buying characteristics, similar types of contracts, things like that, and making it in broader portfolios. Another area is just getting involved in more types of business processes. Supplier relationship management is one that procurement has started to get involved in. They're getting more and more involved in that. It seems that the standardization of that is that procurement is being kind of the keeper of the process, and that certain types of supplier SRM activities are being executed at the business level, but procurement is more and more really the keeper of the SRM process across the corporation. And this is becoming more and more important as more and more companies outsource, as the contracts are getting broader, as companies are moving to portfolio management. The size of contracts in general are getting larger, which leads to the next bullet point around collaborative approaches. We're finding that procurement is taking more and more of a collaborative approach to procurement as these contracts are getting larger. The nature of the larger contracts lend themselves more toward strategic alliances and partnerships as opposed to more transactional relationships, and that's really causing procurement to need to take a more collaborative approach to managing these relationships. Another really emerging area that we're seeing is with regard to payables cash management. Historically, this is something that's really been run by finance. There are some new technologies out there that are merging reverse auction technology with payables cash management technology. And I would say in the last 12 months, we've seen an increasing tendency for procurement to get involved in strategic payables cash management. We see that as an emerging trend as well.
And John, if I could just ask you to try and yell into your phone a little bit, where for some reason your connection is a little bit more faint, and we're having some people saying they're having difficulty hearing you.
Okay. The last trend is regard to organizational capabilities. It was kind of interesting hearing the poll results, because when we interviewed procurement executives, this was actually their most concerning area with regard to organizational capabilities. So I expected this to actually get a higher rating in the poll. But as Don mentioned, with the baby boomers retiring, the Gen Y workers, most executives we talk to are just saying that it's a totally different ballgame with regard to the Gen Y workforce. This area of the workforce just doesn't get attracted to procurement, doesn't get motivated in the same way. So companies are really struggling with how to attract, motivate, and retain the Gen Y workers. So there's a lot of talk about trying to find creative approaches for changing the whole work experience to be able to retain Gen Y workers more effectively and to attract Gen Y workers. So a lot of procurement executives are really trying to get creative in this area and come up with some new ways of doing that. When we talk about the innovation areas later in the presentation, we had some really insightful ideas with regard to that. Another area we heard a lot about was with regard to centers of excellence. This has been an emerging trend, I would say, in the last 5 years or so, but it's becoming more and more commonplace to have dedicated centers of excellence in the procurement organization, primarily in the area of knowledge management. Again, I think with the Gen Y workers, turnover tends to be a much higher environment, and it's becoming the norm. And I think with the combination of higher turnover as well as a lot of retirement for the baby boomers, a lot of procurement organizations are realizing that they really need to focus on a dedicated center of excellence to manage their knowledge. It's something that historically has really been an afterthought. Companies are trying to get much more sophisticated with regard to this. For capturing things like process knowledge, whether it's your sourcing process or SRM process, in terms of technology expertise, documenting how to use technology, and maybe having internal consultants for helping people with technology, whether it's ERFXs or reverse auctions or other types of procurement technology, the spend database, spend visibility, things like that. Other areas with regard to market intelligence, usually the Center of Excellence is the keeper of market intelligence. Whether that's outsourced or done in-house, this is the group that tends to do that and keep it updated, as well as category knowledge, using tools and templates and capturing learnings that are category specific. And then lastly, companies are trying to find more creative training approaches. Again, with the increased turnover with the Gen Y workforce, with the increasing retirement of baby boomers, many are finding the need to use more creative and more effective training approaches. We're hearing a lot about using more experiential training as well as more on-demand computerized training to support their talent management programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Don. Don's going to talk about the approach that we just used last week to come up with what's next in terms of procurement innovation.
Thanks again, John. Dawn, we're going to give this a trial. I'll try to drive this time.
Okay.
Negative. You're going to have to take over. It worked just fine in the practice webinar. Okay, well, we're going to move on into some of the innovation materials John mentioned. We're going to start a little bit of the evolution of procurement. We have all certainly seen a lot of transformation activity in the last 20 years, and we're going to need to do it again for sure. As we all know, it used to be purely a back office clerical function, and through the years it's evolved from really being a tactical part of the enterprise, where maybe it was more of a cost center, to one that really has a strategic role and is a bottom line contributor to shareholder value. So some of your companies are further along than others, certainly, but that's where leading companies are. They're not just obviously focused on cost reduction, but they're proactively driving initiatives that really contribute to not only cost savings, but revenue growth and overall shareholder value. So on the next slide, please. So along that, we're on slide number 19 for those of you following along. So a bit of that 20-year journey of procurement change, there's been a lot of innovation, and it is fun to look back, and I can remember exactly what I was doing during all of these times, even back to the early 90s when strategic sourcing got its formal start, and through a lot of technology innovations and process improvements that have really helped procurement increase its value and contribute to the corporate bottom line. It certainly didn't come without a lot of challenges, though. We all remember how we've tried to sort out the technology during these times. What's vaporware, what's not, how does it all work together? How does it integrate with our homegrown systems? How does it integrate with our ERP systems? All of those challenges. We've gotten, around the turn of the century, got into reverse auctions and e-sourcing, and right on into outsourcing, which is certainly still the thing to do, a strong trend today. We've heard a lot about SRM over the last couple of years, and now today we're hearing about cloud technology and crowdsourcing, and so we're really wondering what's next for procurement and what's that next game-changing innovation, if you will. So to the next slide, when we got these executives together at the CPO Summit last week, we got into a lot of really great conversations about breakthrough results and thinking out of the box and all of that. And we put this slide up, and we're just revisiting some of those typical procurement metrics. And these three are pretty common, probably common to you today. Spend under management, which really measures that reach of procurement. The average annual savings, which measures your effectiveness and how effective your efforts are. The procurement cost per dollar of spend you have in your organization, which gets into your efficiency of the organization. So, these percentages in here are really what we see today as typical aggressive targets, of which many companies don't even meet today. So the real question is, can we change these targets incrementally, or can we really innovate to make dramatic improvements to these targets? Are there other metrics we should be using? Can we also contribute to revenue generation? There is that trade-off, certainly. Should be measuring value contribution instead of savings. So it plays into really a lot of different dynamics around innovation and what our end game is. So when we got onto the next slide, please. When we got to this CPO Summit, we really wanted to engage with these executives on a lot of different discussion topics. And because the procurement space has changed so much and will continue to do that, we see a lot of these challenges today, and we're going to talk about this in a second. Customers certainly more demanding, where more is really expected of procurement contributions. There's more and better competition. There's more complexity. It's all really pointing to a need for a more integrated effort, not only within procurement, but also including our internal and external customers. So to help us during that Innovation Summit, we brought in Adam Richardson. I don't know if any of you have read this book, but is the author of Innovation X, and he works with a company called Frog Design. And they've done some innovative thinking along with companies in recent years, and really helped our group let go of some of the old paradigms that we're all clinging to, and really organize the innovation work sessions around procurement trend themes and leveraging everything that we had come up to so far. So it was very exciting. On to the next slide. We used a lot of really new, creative, non-traditional frameworks. We've all been in brainstorming workshops before, but this was something really unique and something that really got us out of our linear thinking pattern to really be able to view our challenges from a different perspective. This page really just shows an example of one of those frameworks that we used to really start generating some innovative thinking. On to the next slide. We're on slide 21. By the end of the day...
Excuse me, Don. Yes. Before you move forward, since I have some folks that are stuck on an earlier concept, can you talk and describe what spend under management is in your definition when you're saying 70 to 80%?
Yeah, we did get into that conversation quite a bit as well, and not every organization measures it exactly the same way, but it's in general it's spend that procurement has influence over, whether it might not all be centralized, but you'll be able to influence that spend. So it could be setting up master agreements for very tactical type work where you're not actually doing the buying. It might be the business units that are doing the buying, but you've influenced how that spend was sourced initially. So it's spend under your management or tutelage, if you will.
Okay.
By the end of that day that we spent with these CPOs and all the innovation exercises and brainstorming discussions, we came up with over 200 pretty good ideas. Some crazy ones and some that still need some vetting. But it certainly required us to really challenge the norms that we've been taking for granted today. We know that innovation success, as it always does, requires us to be willing to not only experiment and fail, but maybe do that more than once, really, in order to be successful. So a lot of the companies that we see today who are being successful are the ones that are willing to experiment and fail. There are certainly a lot of industries that, a lot of companies that are not comfortable with that type of approach, if you will, but it's something that needs to be done nonetheless. So, there was certainly a lot of green space when we got into our conversation, and even balancing that creativity with business requirements became something for discussion. We do believe that companies who will lead 5 years from now will certainly take that risk to be innovative. And as we said earlier, output from this Innovation Summit is being summarized down in a series of white papers. John's going to get into some of those high-level predictions, if you will, that resulted from this. So I'm going to turn it back over to John, and we're going to get into some of those innovation ideas.
Okay. Let me get the control here. So I'm going to go through now, as Don mentioned, the innovation workshop we just did last Thursday and Friday, so we're still going through all the details. We had about 200 really, I thought, innovative ideas that came out of that. So we're in the process of going through and kind of harvesting those ideas and trying to interpret what those mean and where innovation will likely go in the next 3 to 5 years. So we've got some initial observations that I'll be going through next. But first we want to do a polling question. And this question is about how much incremental value you think true innovation can make. And to put this in context, if you look at, what, say, when did reverse auctions come online? Maybe 10 years ago. It used to be on a good project, you might be able to complete a supplier negotiation in 2 weeks, right? Some negotiations would carry on for 2 months. And then along came online reverse auctions, and you actually could do a negotiation much more effectively in 2 hours for certain spend categories. So that kind of innovation didn't make an incremental change. It wasn't like we got a 20% improvement. We got like a 10 times improvement in the cycle time of how long it took to do a negotiation. And that's what we're looking at. If we have true innovation, not just incremental improvements, but if we have true innovation, how much incremental value do you think you can add to the enterprise? And when we say value, it can be defined in a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about this next. Not just cost savings, it could be revenue generation, it could be in any way that you think you can define value. How much more incremental value do you think you can bring to the enterprise? Is it A, up to 50% more value, B, up to 2 times more value, C, 2 to 3 times more value, or D, even greater? So let's take a couple minutes for everyone to do that, and then we'll see what the responses are.
So, John, I've got a very relevant question that came in earlier today while this poll is open. And a gentleman asked and said, how do you engage the creativity of the less experienced workers in the 3 to 10 year range? Do you have any ideas that came out of your summit on how to engage the creativity of the early, mid-range type folks?
Well, actually, personally, I think they're going to be more creative. When we did this Innovation Summit, we intentionally brought in someone, the author of Innovation X, who basically had no experience in procurement. He came from product design, the product design field, and a lot of companies intentionally bring in people that have absolutely no experience in the area they're trying to innovate, because those are the ones that are going to ask the dumb questions and end up being the brilliant questions. So I think having the less experienced workers is going to add to the innovation. So, and that's the trend we're seeing, right? As the baby boomers retire, more and more new, younger workers outside of the procurement space are coming into these organizations. So I think that's going to fuel even more innovation going forward.
So then the next problem is going to be, how do you get mid-management to accept these new out-of-the-box
right.
ideas non-procurement people are bringing to the table, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So anyway, poll just closed. Are you surprised by this?
It's pretty evenly split. Obviously, we're trying to push the envelope. Personally, I think if we come up with innovation, I think it's going to be D, greater than 2 to 3 times, but it was pretty evenly split. I was actually expecting that people were going to be a little more conservative and we would have more people vote A. So I'm actually optimistic seeing these results. So that's great.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So let's go into what some of the trends were. There were 3 common trends. Again, we had 3 new trends that we saw with regard to innovation. And again, this is very preliminary. We've only sorted through the data, for a day now. We just finished the Innovation Summit on Friday, so we've just started going through this. And there are some processes that Frog Design brought to the table around innovation that we're going to be using to harvest these ideas and to really put a lot of meat on them. And as Don mentioned, we'll be publishing that in a series of white papers coming up. But these are our initial impressions. The first really key theme was around expanding procurement's value. Everyone at the summit felt that today procurement is kind of put in this box of you're the guys that give us savings, right? So we're kind of constrained that our focus is on delivering savings, and these savings aren't small savings. Some of these companies are delivering savings of $100 million or more a year, but most felt that they could add a much more strategic value to the corporation. And I'll talk about what some of those ideas were. We feel that if you apply some of these principles to areas outside of cost savings, that you can increase the value contribution to the company by a magnitude of 2 to 3 times more value than you do today. So what do we mean by that? One area is in revenue generation and product innovation. I think a minority of companies today involve procurement upfront in revenue generation and product innovation efforts. We think that's going to grow. Obviously, when you're designing new products, your companies come out with new products, whether you're a bank and come out with new services, or whether you're a manufacturing company developing new hard products. A lot of times, 100% of the value of those products are made by outsourced parties, right? And at a minimum, suppliers make up probably at least half the value of those new products. So why wouldn't you involve suppliers in procurement upfront in product design? We're seeing that more and more. We think that the innovation will be that companies find a way to embrace that more formally, so that procurement will not only be kind of an afterthought after things or product design decisions are made, they'll be made up front. Another area is in taking advantage of procurement's relationships and insights with key suppliers to open new markets, facilitate global expansion, help with local political lobbying. Procurement is really the only organization that has a relationship with all of a company's suppliers. And we heard examples in the workshop of cases where companies were, say, going into a new market, a new country, and regulations weren't allowing some of their products to be approved. There were a lot of roadblocks. And in one case, one company had a relationship with a supplier who was well connected politically in that country. And, obviously it was in the supplier's best interest for this company to be successful because they were supplying to them. And they just individually lobbied and were able to remove some of these roadblocks, and they got the company opened up for some of these new products that were being locked out of. And so, as opposed to doing that on an ad hoc basis, almost by accident, most people felt that having a formal process to engage the supplier community on behalf of the company, whether it would be in regard to opening up new markets or lobbying or other things like that, there was tremendous value, not just small one-off value, opportunities, but huge value in that from a revenue standpoint. So, one prediction is that procurement will take a greater role in those types of efforts. Another is in regard to merger and acquisition activities. I mean, if you think about it, buying other companies is not a lot different from going out and buying products and services, right? There are a lot of the same approaches that apply. And again, some of our participants have been involved in M&A activities, we expect, again, as procurement gets more sophisticated in their skills and gets a better reputation in the corporation, that they're going to be expanding, not only in buying goods and services, but in helping with merger and acquisition activities in a very strategic way. Other ideas that came up was with regard to participating in non-traditional cost reduction areas like taxes and royalties and other areas. This is an area that's grown. 5 years ago, procurement was rarely involved in buying things like legal services and marketing. Now that's pretty commonplace. There were some other examples that were brought up in the innovation workshop where procurement organizations were able to help companies reduce their tax liabilities. Again, a lot of times through their supplier networks and lobbying and things like that. So again, that's huge value beyond just traditional cost reduction. Another is in connecting with non-traditional business partners through supplier diversity programs and supplier outreach programs. Again, helps with the whole revenue generation side of the business. Reciprocity programs, being more innovative with regard to that. A few companies have formal reciprocity programs with their suppliers, where suppliers who are also customers. We're seeing that's even companies that have a formal program, they typically are only addressing the tip of the iceberg there. Most people that we talked to felt that was a huge opportunity. So we think that that's an area that could grow. And then another kind of interesting concept that came up was that procurement really should be, and most procurement organizations that are progressive really are the negotiation experts. They go through formal training. They have lots of really sophisticated techniques with regard to negotiation skills. Yet on the sales side of the business, the salespeople really aren't very well trained in negotiations. And we had a couple of cases where procurement was actually working with the sales side of the business to help educate them, and in some cases participate in selling negotiations on the sales side of the business. So that's an area that we see that could be broadened as well. So in general, we think that progressive, one of the huge areas of innovation will be in expanding procurement's value. And if procurement gets involved in some of these more strategic areas with regard to revenue generation and product innovation and M&A activity, that not only will they be able to add value in savings, so if they're delivering $100 million in value in savings in purchased materials and services, that value could expand by at least 2 to 3 times in the future through some of the innovation in this area. The second kind of innovation prediction or theme that we heard was with regard to what we call virtual procurement. And this term came out of one of the workshops that we had. From the previous slide, procurement is getting asked to be involved in more and more activities. Some of those activities that I mentioned earlier, they take lots of resources. I mean, we're talking maybe twice the amount of effort if a procurement organization does all those things that I mentioned earlier as compared to just buying goods and services. We're talking a lot more effort, a lot more resource requirements. But at the same time, procurement is being challenged to do more with less. There's a lot of pushback against building an empire and growing the organization size. And that's really, I think, it's one of the factors that has held procurement back in the past. When procurement tries to take on more roles and add more people, there's organizational resistance to that. So some of the ideas that we heard from the innovation workshop was that procurement organizations that can find a way to do all these additional activities, but do it in a way that has either the same or even a smaller footprint, that's probably going to be the model that works going forward. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that, to do twice as much work with fewer people, is through true innovation, right? You can't just do it by snapping your finger and say, we'll work harder. So some of the things that we see happening, there'll be this virtual operational model will be facilitated by automation, particularly, as Don mentioned earlier, the cloud-based technology. We see that as being an emerging trend. So using cheaper, faster technology to automate as much as possible, using suppliers and their value-added services more and more where it makes sense. Certainly using more standardized tools and templates. There were lots of discussions around standard contracts and RFP templates and things like that. a lot of companies I think have made progress there, but even companies that have standard contracts, it seems that the exceptions are pretty much the norm. That even if you start with a standard contract, you always modify it based on supplier pushback or supplier preferences. Some of the discussions, some companies are starting to just really have pretty firm stances on that if you want to do business with us, you'll use this contract, otherwise we'll go to the next supplier. And we're seeing that more and more. And I think if companies have to be smarter about how they work, they're going to be forced to do that. So we expect the use of standardized tools and templates to be more and more important, which the next bullet around centers of excellence becomes more and more important, because you're going to need a group that is really controlling these and creating and refining these standardized tools and templates. It has to be a very formal process. So we see that as one of the keys to innovation here. And then another kind of theme we heard was around, while procurement will continue to be more and more centralized, the transactional activities that add little value through automation and technology will likely be more decentralized. So we're going to have to push more and more work. If procurement's going to have to do more with less, some of the more transactional work will either have to be automated or be done at the business unit level. And then the last one is with regard to outsourcing. Obviously, if you're going to do more with less, there will be more and more outsourcing, most likely, and potentially even just on-demand SME contractors, where you bring in a contractor to do a certain project, a sourcing project, or a certain expert in some area. So I think if you really create a virtual operational model, these are some of the things, some of the innovative ideas that we're going to have to do here. And then the last one is with regard to talent management again. There was a lot of discussion around the challenges associated with the Gen Y workforce and the retiring baby boomers. I think most people felt that this is going to force a radical rethinking of the procurement organization, not just some new boxes on the org chart or some small incremental changes, but some radical rethinking of what the procurement organization looks like, both in terms of structure, technology, roles, responsibilities, compensation, lots of things. Some of the specific ideas that came up, one was with regard to rethinking talent retention strategies. That I think the traditional mindset is the less turnover, the better. I think it's most people want talent for a lifetime. They want to have lower turnover. And, maybe that's a traditional paradigm that needs to be thrown out. If the Gen Y workers are going to get bored and want to leave and do something else after 2 or 3 years, maybe we should embrace that, right? So instead of having mediocre talent for a lifetime, maybe we should go and find the best talent we can get. Even if we think they're only going to stay around for 2 or 3 years, maybe that's something that's okay. And if that's okay, we need to create a structure that will embrace that. So it's a new paradigm in the future that maybe organizations are going to have to embrace. It's different, and it's not kind of our traditional way of thinking with regard to talent management, but maybe that's the new paradigm. Again, as that happens, though, more formal knowledge management to make up for the higher turnover is going to be critical. And so we think there's going to be some innovation there, not just creating libraries on SharePoint, but much more innovative ways to share knowledge, to update knowledge, to get knowledge from our workforce so that organizational knowledge is documented. We think there's going to be some innovation in the whole knowledge management space. Don't know exactly what that is yet, and we'll be working on that, but that's an area of innovation for sure. Another area is in the whole compensation model. Today most companies have fairly narrow bands of compensation, traditional salary ranges that are fairly narrow, and I think that, again, that promotes kind of a mediocrity. It promotes getting, an average worker in, but the kind of the superstars companies can never find a way to attract. So there was a lot of discussion around using more pay performance. We had a couple of participants that actually are already starting to use pay for performance models in procurement. Whether you're sharing a percentage of savings or having bonuses based on value contribution, there's a lot of discussion around more innovative pay practices to attract superstars in the organization. And then another area was just in the selection criteria, moving away from the traditional, finding people that have procurement experience to more holistic criteria, whether it's creativity, strategic thinking, relationship building skills. So looking beyond the normal mold for the procurement talent. Another area is social networking. Most companies today ban social networking from corporate computers. The thought was, well, if we're going to have a virtual environment, have a workforce that really embraces social networking, maybe we're going to have to find a way to embrace social networking in a productive way, obviously, but especially to make up for the culture in a virtual environment. Again, we don't know exactly what that looks like, but we expect that there will be some innovation with regard to embracing social networking technology to help create culture in a virtual environment. We talked earlier about training. There was a lot of discussion around making training more accessible, more interesting. We're going to have to really rethink training. Maybe training comes in the form of a Wii game, right, or some type of technology that's fun and that people are doing on a more routine basis, not something that they do once a year to check off a corporate objective. Something that's, again, with the higher turnover, with the new kind of virtual environment, training is going to become more and more important. We think processes will change more frequently. Technology is going to change more frequently. So training is going to be a key part of the organizational footprint. And to make it more effective, it's going to have to be more entertaining and experiential. Another area is with regard to sharing top talent. Again, if the Gen Y workforce is going to want to change jobs, it doesn't necessarily have to be outside of the company, but it might be outside of the organization. Procurement may want to promote their top talent to move to other organizations. They then become procurement advocates outside the organization. So it's a positive thing for both the corporation as well as procurement. So those are some of the trends that we see. Again, these are our preliminary predictions with regard to innovation. We'll be harvesting a lot of these and fine-tuning them and adding a lot of detail over the coming weeks, and we'll be sharing that with all of you with regard to upcoming white papers and potentially upcoming webinars. So with that, that concludes our presentation today. Amanda, anything else?
We have about 2 minutes. Do you mind if I just ask a question or two?
Sure.
So one of the questions came in when you were talking about earlier in the innovation, and where do you see technology as far as driving innovation and adding additional value for procurement?
Well, I think certainly there's a move toward cloud computing. Today, technology seems to be fairly painful for companies to implement and embrace. I think some of the areas that we heard where innovation was required with regard to forward-looking spend visibility, not just backward-looking. We expect innovation to be a lot of innovation in the whole, spend visibility space. I expect innovation on the whole knowledge management space, sharing information more effectively and updating information more clearly, especially when you have a mobile workforce, a virtual environment where a lot of telecommuters and people that aren't necessarily working together physically, especially as companies become more and more global as well. So I think two main areas will be in the whole spend visibility space, forward-looking, as well as information sharing and supporting a virtual work environment.
Okay, and then also, I think this is interesting. You talked about supply chain organizational needs. Is there a standard percentage that you recommend or that you've seen people putting in their budget for organizational investment?
I haven't seen that. This is a fairly emerging area. I think it's companies are talking about it a lot, but we haven't seen companies really get creative yet. It's one of those. I think this is one of those emerging areas, at least that I've seen. So companies are starting to get worried about it as they see their retirement rates go up, as they see the challenges they're facing with the Gen Y workforce. They're saying we've got to do something different. But I haven't seen that translate necessarily into budgets yet.
Okay, thank you. So what I want to do now is, folks, on your screen is another opportunity to download today's presentation if you have not done so already, and you should also have a copy of it in your inbox. And I'm going to hold the rest of the questions, but I do want to honor our 1 hour time limit, but also tell you to reach out to John and Don if you have additional questions, you'd like to have additional conversations, and certainly if you want to receive their additional white papers and their research about innovation, make sure to reach out to them. And John and Don, I want to thank you for your time today. As always, you bring us a fabulous webinar, and by the couple hundred people that registered for it, it's a hot topic, and you did a great job presenting it. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Good. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.